Alrighty, this morning our topic is talking about diligence. And talk about being diligent. And we'll read a few different proverbs as we go through, but there's one key proverb which I put up on there for you. Here's my remote. Proverbs 10:4. Proverbs 10:4. Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So we're going to look at those two key words, negligent and diligence, and see what we can learn from that this morning. Stacy and I and the kids go camping quite a lot. In fact, we go camping so much that we made two different camping checklists. We have one for car camping. We have a list of all the different things to bring with to make sure we don't forget anything. We have one for backpacking. A very helpful tool. We use it all the time. Except for whatever reason, this last week when we went camping, we didn't use it. We looked at it, and we just didn't print it off, so you can't physically check off things that are done once they're packed. And we went to Door County on Sunday night, and on Sunday night we discovered that we forgot to bring the pack and play that Anya sleeps in. So she had to roll around in the tent floor. We were actually short a couple of sleeping bags as well, and Stacey forgot her pillow. So Monday we were going to go swimming. We did go swimming, except for somehow 3 out of the 9, that's 1/3 of our family, didn't have their swimsuits in the swim bag. It just missed the list. And that led to lots of tears and shopping trips, and then I cried, and then lots of driving around and time lost at the beach. That happened. Now, contrast that with Tuesday. We went with Stacy's parents, and they graciously took us out to get ice cream. The ice cream place is small. If you've been at Wilson's, right? It's called Wilson's. If you've been to Door County, you know it. Small, crowded place. This is even on a Tuesday, and we're ordering 11 cones. So you think about that. So I got out a piece of paper and I wrote down everyone's request. And I grouped them by size and flavor, and I counted to make sure I had 11, and I checked them off after we handed them to each person. And then we had Joseph and Jenny come inside the building with us, and they were the deliverers, so we got one, and they went and handed them out to the people as everyone else waited outside. It went smooth and quick, which meant we got to spend more time outside by the water enjoying our ice cream. It was nice. Diligence leads to a better life. So, our key verse, Proverbs 10:4, poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So, what does it look like? What are the contrasts of negligence versus diligence? First, we've got to define it, negligence. Let's talk about negligence. What does it mean to be negligent? If you want to turn, if you're not already in Proverbs, turn to Proverbs chapter 6. And Ginny pointed out to me, if you're reading through Proverbs, like I've been encouraging you today, and you've done your reading this morning, Proverbs 6 is this morning, so it's August 6th. So Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 11, say this, go to the ant, O sluggard. Observe her ways and be wise, which, having no chief, officer, or ruler, prepares her food in the summer, and gathers her provisions in the harvest. How long will you lie down, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your need like an armed man. If you want to keep your finger in there, and also then turn to Proverbs 24, another section I want to read for us. Proverbs 24, beginning of verse 30. Says this, I passed by the field of the sluggard and by the vineyard of the man lacking sense, and behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles. Its surface was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. When I saw, I reflected upon it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and then your poverty will come as a robber, and your want like an armed man. So what do we see about negligence in these verses? We see, first of all, that negligence is being a sluggard. And we can observe a few things about a sluggard in these verses. One thing is that a sluggard doesn't prepare. So that in chapter 6, it talks about this. A sluggard doesn't prepare. You think about this, preparation takes more time than performance. How many hours does a musician or an athlete spend practicing as compared to how much time they actually spend performing? When you are preparing for a presentation, you might spend hours preparing for the presentation that will only last a few minutes. Preparation is very necessary. A sluggard doesn't prepare. Well, preparing well could mean, in our lives, could mean setting aside an emergency fund for when things don't go as expected, or setting aside money for retirement. Those are the examples of being prepared. Being prepared could mean getting your bikes in working order before the day before you leave for a biking trip. That's just a hypothetical situation, not speaking from experience. A sluggard doesn't prepare. What does it look like to prepare? A sluggard also doesn't gather, also from chapter 6. They don't gather at the appropriate time. You think, they mention the ant in Proverbs, but also think of the squirrel. All summer long, they're running around, specifically in the fall. They go into overtime. They're constantly gathering up things because they know winter's coming. They're gathering all the time. You've heard possibly the phrase farmers often use, actually a lot of people use it, but make hay while the sun is shining. When the weather's appropriate, it's time to do the right things. So a sluggard doesn't gather at the right time. Well, gathering for us could mean, you think about this, I'm not talking about hoarding here when we're talking about gathering, right? Gathering could mean keeping the things that you have gathered organized in your house so you can find them. Actually, gathering could actually mean getting rid of things you don't use. That would be an appropriate idea of gathering. It's not hoarding, but it's gathering things that are helpful and productive for us. Things that make our life better. Important distinction when you talk about gathering. Well, a sluggard doesn't gather. And when we go to chapter 24, we find that a sluggard doesn't weed. Mandy hosted Bible study last Wednesday, and afterwards she gave us a tour for gardens. If you haven't been to her house yet, she has lots of gardens. It's cool. It's awesome. So at some point I said, Mandy, how much do you weed? And you said?
All the time.
All the time. I weed all the time. Mandy is not a sluggard. She does not have that problem. Think about in our lives, what do the weeds look like? Well, weeds in our lives are those sin habits that keep creeping back up. You don't have to water or tend for weeds. They just come. You don't have to give them special soil to make them. They'll just come. We have some sin habits in our lives. They'll just naturally come up. There's that sin nature within us. It could also be time wasters, things that kill our productivity or kill beauty in our lives. The sort of sense of clutter that would get in the way. You think about this. Christ planted the seed of life in the garden of our souls. That seed is there. He has done it. All we do, we accept that free gift from Him of redemption. That seed is there, but we need to keep weeding around that free gift, around that free seed, so that it can grow to maturity. Otherwise, and you know the parable of the soils, otherwise the weeds grow up around it. It's not that the seed isn't there anymore. It just can't grow. It doesn't have any more room. And so we've got to continually weed out. Well, we see a sluggard doesn't weed. I saw a phrase, you may have heard it, a man of words and not of deeds is like a garden full of weeds. We need to put to action our intent and not just talk about things. And lastly, a sluggard doesn't repair. The walls, again, chapter 24, the walls were broken down. And this is where all the wives are looking at the husbands and pointing out their honey-do lists. See, honey, stop being a sluggard. We've got all this broken stuff around the house. Maybe that's just in my family, I don't know. But the reality is, to give you guys a break, we live in a broken world, and so things will always constantly be breaking. There will always be something that needs to be repaired. The good news if you're a maintenance man, that's called job security. There's always something that needs to be fixed. But let's not forget about the repairing of very important things, like repairing relationships, or repairing brokenness and despair that many millions of people are living in because they don't know Jesus Christ. When we're talking about repairing, we want to keep our house in good order. That's certainly true, but we also want to repair those relationships and the spiritual lives around us and be a part of that. We also see that a sluggard, we saw it in both verses, a sluggard lies down and sleeps, slumbers, folds their hands, just rests. I think of the twiddling thumb concept. You just lay in, what are you just twiddling your thumbs? People don't twiddle their thumbs anymore. Actually, now it's a useful thing. It's called texting. But it used to just be doing your board. But even that is, you're at least doing something. But that concept, the visual aid of folding your hands and resting. I'm just not going to do anything. So negligence is being a sluggard. And those are all the things Scripture tells us about a sluggard. Negligence can also be described as being slack. So think about in tug of war. If you've ever played tug of war, slack rope is not good. If your team has a slack rope, it's just going to get pulled away really quickly. Or if any of you go sailing, when your sails go slack, it means the wind isn't in the sails anymore. The boat is not going to be going anywhere. You need a tight sail for it to be productive, for it to go somewhere. Negligence is like that slack sail. And it might look good and pretty up there, it might make a nice picture, but it's not going to get you anywhere when you're sailing. The dictionary describes negligence as a failure to take proper care in doing something. My paraphrase of that definition is, a negligence is a lawsuit waiting to happen. And I can tell you that because when I Googled the word negligence, I came up with a million lawyer websites of legal sites of how to avoid negligence and what to happen when you have negligence and all these work protocols to avoid negligence. So our society knows negligence. In fact, we know other people's negligence and we think it's payday is how that works. So taking proper care in doing something is how the dictionary describes negligence. And the synonyms include neglectful, remiss, careless, lax, irresponsible, inattentive, heedless, or thoughtless. Okay, it's good to know what negligence is, but the real question I have for both of these words, negligence and diligence, is what are the consequences? What are the consequences of living that way? And I want to give you 3 for each. So first of all, negligence leads to poverty. In Proverbs 6:11, it talks about, now there's that parallel verse in 24, but 6:11 says, your poverty will come in like a vagabond. My footnote says it's literally one who walks. So think about that. What that means is if you're negligent, poverty will literally walk right into your life. It's just going to walk in there and it's going to sit down and make itself at home. So it's going to lead to poverty. And then the second part of verse 11 says, poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your need, the things that you need, the things to live life, like an armed man. Again, my footnote says literally a man with a shield. Or think someone who is well equipped, has armor, and they're just going to force their way right into your life. All of a sudden, you have all these needs in life. Your needs aren't being met. You don't have gas money. You don't have money for rent. You don't have money to get a haircut if you have to do those things. All of a sudden, that's gone. Why? Because negligence allowed poverty to just sweep right into your life. So we see negligence leads to poverty. You think of it this way. Think of in chapter 24, the analogy of the broken down wall. What happens is now more critters can get in. Weeds are growing up in your harvest, so your harvest isn't as good. It's not as productive. Also, that means the work that you do is harder. And when you actually do get up and from your nap and go do the work, now you've got to pull all these weeds that have grown up big and strong because you didn't take care of them right away. So you're working harder for less. You're getting less produce for more work. That's what happens to negligence, and that's what happens to poverty. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not making statements like everyone who's in poverty is negligent. It doesn't work both ways. There are circumstances outside of our control that can lead to poverty. A lot of times, corruption and just the way systems are set up. But the reality is, sometimes we really like to blame everybody else but ourselves, and some of it is just plain negligence. Negligence leads to poverty. Secondly, negligence leads to wickedness. I want to read here Proverbs chapter 10, a few verses. Negligence leads to wickedness. Proverbs chapter 10, verses 2 through 5 say this. Ill-gotten gains do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord will not allow the righteous to hunger, but he will reject the craving of the wicked. Poor is he who works with a negligent hand. This is our key verse. but the hand of the diligent makes rich. And then verse 5, he who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. So, negligence leads to wickedness. Look at that verse 2 talks about ill-gotten gains. What are ill-gotten gains? Think about taking shortcuts at work or in repairing something and say, oh, I can just leave out that step. Or if I cut this out, my bottom line will be bigger. I'll make more money. Well, those are ill-gotten gains. And that's wicked. That's wicked. You're not doing the best that you can do. You're not producing the best product. Ill-gotten gains, I think another example of that is just plain stealing. We always think of lots of stealing big things, but it can just be a little bit at a time. It can be stealing time from your employer. Those are ill-gotten gains, not giving your best, not doing it wholeheartedly, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then look at verse 3. Negligence leads to wickedness. Verse 3 talks about the cravings of the wicked. The cravings of the wicked. What do the wicked crave? There's the sense of coveting. It's desiring what other people had. I wish I had their car or their house or their vacation. Well, a lot of times people have those things because they worked their butts off to get them, or they invested well. So instead of coveting, we'd be better served to be working. Instead of daydreaming about what we could have, why not put our hands and our minds to work? Cravings of the wicked. That's what a negligence leads to wickedness. And then thirdly, negligence leads to dissatisfaction. Negligence leads to dissatisfaction. For this, I want to go to Colossians 3:23. The familiar verse, if you hear it. Whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men. Whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men. Now, I'm talking about negligence leading to dissatisfaction. If you think about that verse, I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to flip the side of it. What does the opposite of Colossians 23 look like? So, instead of whatever you do, whatever being anything, Lord, anything I do, I'm going to do it for your glory. Instead of anything, it's more like waiting for the perfect opportunity. You'll hear phrases like, well, that just wasn't the right fit. That just wasn't for me. When we're waiting for the perfect opportunity, that is putting ourselves in a position of dissatisfaction. We're not satisfied with what we have right now. We're looking for that perfect thing, that winning lottery ticket, that, perfect boss, whatever the scenario is. Instead of the second part, instead of serving heartily, Colossians tells us to serve heartily, instead we have incomplete with little effort. We're not serving wholeheartedly. We're not serving with all of our soul, is what that literally means. It's really half-ass instead of whole heart. You'll hear phrases like, do just enough to keep your job, or do just enough to get a promotion, just enough to get by, and not giving it your everything. And when you don't put your whole efforts or abilities into work, that puts you in a position of dissatisfaction. Negligence leads to dissatisfaction. And then thirdly, instead of serving as for the Lord, we find ourselves serving to be noticed by man. So you've heard the phrase, surely, when the cat's away, the mice will play. When the boss is gone, the employees play solitaire. I've seen phrases like that. Trying to please men is never going to be fulfilling. You're never going to be satisfied trying to please men. And so we see that negligence leads to poverty, it leads to wickedness, and it leads to dissatisfaction. Well, thankfully, there's an alternative to negligence, and that's diligence, if we want to talk about diligence. What is diligence? Well, diligence, it's not the exact same word, but it's the same root word. In Hebrew, it comes from this root of something sharp or sharp-pointed. And that helped my imagination to think about this. When we go camping, we have a little hatchet for breaking up kindling wood. This hatchet that we possess was sharpened about a decade ago or so. And it's good. It's really childproof because our kids can play with it. You don't have to worry about them getting hurt. You can actually chop kindling with either side because they're both, the sharp end and the dull end are about the same. It really doesn't matter. Well, last week when we were camping with Stacy's parents, her dad had this brand new hatchet, like protective cover. There's no scratches on it. It was beautiful. He didn't even want to use it. If you just looked at it wrong, you'd slice your finger open. It was a thing of beauty. But do you know how much more fun it was to cut up kindling wood with that hatchet than with our hatchet? That's a good picture of the difference between a diligent hand and a negligent hand. Being diligent, it makes your tool sharp. I can see where that word came from, how it came from the same way. So diligence is like a sharp knife, a sharp tool. Diligence is like an ant. Proverbs chapter 6 talked about that. You think about the ant. The ant, in Proverbs 6 said, the ant doesn't wait for direction. The ant does what needs to be done when it needs to be done. That's called initiative. If you've ever worked with, hired someone and you see like finding that initiative is a hard thing to find. Just do it something because it needs to be done, not because you were told to or because is it in my job description or not, but it's just that's what needs to be done. And what else did it say about the ant? It said the ant prepares food in summer and gathers provision in the harvest. That is at the proper time. Sometimes, this is important, sometimes we get the picture of diligence is that I should always be doing something. Like diligent means I'm super busy all the time. But diligence is really doing the right thing at the right time. You think about it, it doesn't do any good to try and harvest in January, or at least in Wisconsin, in January. It doesn't do any good to try and harvest in May. Those aren't the right times to do a harvest. So the goal is not to try and run around and look busy. Hey, look how diligent I am. I'm super busy. No, the goal is to be productive, doing the right things at the right time. So diligence is like a sharp knife or like an ant. The dictionary describes it as having or showing care and conscientiousness in one's work or duties. Synonyms include industrious, hardworking, conscientious, particular, meticulous, rigorous, careful, or thorough. Okay, so that's what diligence is, but again, the key question is now, what is it? We need to know what it is, but what are the consequences? And again, I have three for you. The first consequence of diligence is that it produces a better harvest. You think about it, the weeds aren't taking up nutrients from the soil because they've been removed. The wall is keeping out predators because it's been maintained and kept up. Our key verse says that the hand of the diligent makes rich. That being rich is not a terrible thing. In fact, being rich is simply a byproduct of diligence. Now again, I said this before, it's not that all who are diligent become rich. It doesn't work that way. Again, because there's outside circumstances beyond ourselves. But it's true that you will be richer than you were if you weren't diligent. Your produce will be better. You'll have a better harvest. It may not be the best, but it will be better than it was otherwise. Diligence just makes your harvest better. So that's true whether you're talking about literal crops, whether you're talking about schoolwork that you're doing, or accounts that you're auditing, or pictures that you're taking. It's true of sports or hobbies that we're involved in. It's true of souls that we're praying for and witnessing to. No matter what our work is, diligence produces a better harvest, a better end result. It just makes things better. Secondly, diligence puts you in a better position. And this means a few different things. First of all, it can mean with better company. Proverbs 22:29 says, "Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men." So when you do work well, you get noticed. Now, it's important not to work hard in order to get noticed. That becomes pleasing man, like we talked about. But again, just like being rich is it's a byproduct of diligence, so too is being noticed. You get noticed not because you're trying to get noticed, but because you're just being diligent, and people notice that. Why do they notice that? Because it's rare, because you don't see it very often. This also, by the way, doesn't mean that if you go unnoticed, you're not being diligent. You can sometimes be very diligent, be working behind the scenes, and nobody knows that you're doing it. It doesn't mean it's bad, or be like, hey, look at me. Just recognize that when you are diligent, you will get noticed more than otherwise. There's two ways to get noticed, I should mention, is doing something awesome with diligence or doing something awful. So, being noticed isn't the end game. Sometimes you can be noticed for the wrong reason. Here's what happens when you get a better harvest, though, what it does for you, why these two go together. When you have a better harvest, it gives you in a position to have more options. When you've got a better harvest, now you could expand your harvest. You could have a bigger crop, or you could hire more workers, or you could improve the yield on your harvest. If you've heard the phrase, the rich get richer, it's usually said in a derogatory tone, but the reality is, if diligence is what helped you get rich, then the diligence will help you invest those riches into good things that will help you get richer. On the other hand, if you got rich by taking shortcuts or by luck, then there's nothing to say that that wealth is going to increase. It could go just as quick as it came, which is what Proverbs 13:1 says. Wealth obtained by fraud dwindles, but the one who gathers by labor increases it. It continues to grow. So you get put in a better position. You get surrounded by better audience, if you will. The king notices. The people around you notice. You get put in a better position in that you have more options for your next harvest. And then thirdly, and I would say most importantly, is that diligence honors the Lord. And I had already read for you Colossians 3:23, but I want to read the next verse as well. Colossians 3:23 and 24. Whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord, rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. So it's great to see harvest. It's great to see improvement in your life, and I think diligence does that. All the rewards of this life that diligence bring are all blessings from the Lord. So you can thank the Lord for them when you see them, but the absolute best consequence of diligence is that it honors the Lord. Now someday we're going to encounter the Lord face to face, and we're going to have to give an account of our time spent on earth. Now, we have to recognize that there is nothing that we do for our entire lives that will get us into heaven. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that we have to, if we do everything diligently, then God will let us in. We can't impress God. We can't earn our way to heaven. But we will still stand before God, believers and unbelievers, at our appointed day, and we're gonna have to answer about how we spent the time He gave us, how we spent the money He put us in charge of, how we built the relationships that He gave us. And if we've lived our lives with diligence, that meeting, that conversation, is going to be a much more pleasant meeting. Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Diligence leads to a better life, a better harvest now, a better position in the future, and a better standing before the Lord in eternity.